He paid for her coffee when her card was declined, not knowing she was a CEO who'd been watching him all along. The morning rush buzzed like static in the cafe at the base of Donovan Tower. Baristas called out names, steam hissed from the espresso machine, and the scent of roasted beans lingered in the air like a promise. Rachel Donovan, 30 years old, CEO of the tower's top-floor empire, stepped in wearing a crisp white blouse, a gray pencil skirt, and urgency in her stride. No one noticed her, not as a CEO, not as anything more than another professional in need of caffeine. She approached the counter, tapping her phone while juggling her tablet and a folder tucked under one arm. "One large latte with an extra shot, please," she said, her voice polished but distracted. "That'll be $5.85, the barista replied cheerfully. Rachel lifted her card, inserted it. The reader blinked. Declined. She frowned, trying again. Still declined. Hold on." She reached into her leather satchel, searching the side pocket, then the center. Nothing. Her wallet wasn't there. Panic pinched her chest. She never forgot her wallet, not ever. Except, apparently, today. "I'm really sorry," she said, embarrassed now. "I think I left my wallet in my office. Could you maybe hold it for a second? I can run up and—" The barista glanced at the growing line behind her, lips thinning. That was when a quiet voice cut through the tension. "It's just coffee. Happens to the best of us." Rachel turned. A man stepped forward from the side. Tall, maybe mid-30s, worn jeans, a navy polo, security badge clipped to his belt. His brown hair was short, neat, his face calm. His name tag read, Caleb. Before she could protest, he raised his phone and scanned the contactless reader. The payment went through with a gentle chime. The barista relaxed. "Thank you, sir." Caleb gave a small nod and turned to Rachel. "Here," he said, holding out the latte. "No big deal." She took it, stunned. "Wait, you don't have to—" "I know," he shrugged. "But if it were me, you'd do the same." There was something disarming about his tone. No pity, no performance. Just kindness, straightforward and quiet. Rachel smiled, faintly. "Still, thank you." "I'll pay you back," Caleb interrupted with a small smile. "No need." As she adjusted her bag, the hot cup tilted and a few drops splashed onto her blouse. She winced. "Of course. Perfect." Without a word, Caleb reached into his back pocket and pulled out a clean napkin. He stepped close, not too close, and gently dabbed at the stain near her collarbone. His touch was respectful, precise, like someone who knew exactly where the line was. "There," he said, "mostly gone." Rachel looked up at him. He was already turning away. "Wait, what's your name?" He paused, glanced over his shoulder. "Caleb." And then he walked off, disappearing through the exit near the elevator bay. Rachel stood still, clutching her cup, the napkin still in her hand. Around her the line moved again. Orders were shouted. Espresso poured. But something had changed. A small, simple gesture. A man who didn't know her, didn't recognize her title or salary or face. And yet he had paid for her coffee, wiped her shirt, and left without waiting for thanks or recognition. She looked down at the napkin, the faint trace of coffee now drying on the edge. People were often kind when they knew who she was, when they expected something in return. But Caleb, he didn't even ask her name. Rachel took a long sip from her latte, still warm, still perfect. And then, with a thoughtful frown and something shifting in her chest, she headed toward the elevators, her first meeting of the day still waiting. But now, her thoughts were somewhere else entirely, with a man named Caleb and a coffee she would never forget. The conference room on the 26th floor was glass-walled and quiet, with nothing but the soft hum of a coffee machine in the corner and the rhythmic tapping of laptop keys. Rachel sat at the head of the long mahogany table, sleeves rolled up, a neat stack of printed resumes in front of her. It was her personal decision to review the shortlist for the new regional tech initiative, something she'd fought for after years of relying too heavily on department filters and impersonal software. The stakes were high. Donovan Enterprises was expanding its digital division into 3 new cities. This team would build the foundation. Rachel wanted people with grit, not just polished credentials. She scanned one resume, then another. Solid candidates, yes, but something about the uniformity made her restless. Too many perfect lines, too many buzzwords. She reached for the next folder, and then she paused. The name at the top stopped her cold. Caleb Morgan. Her eyes narrowed. She remembered that name. She had just read it, not in the accepted pile, but in the rejection column. She reached into the discard stack and rifled through until she found it. His resume had been marked in red ink. Gap in employment. Incomplete explanation, discard. But now, seeing it again, she read more carefully. Former senior systems engineer, Halbert Technologies. Her heart caught slightly. Halbert was no joke. Prestigious, selective. She scanned down, 8 years experience, several internal promotions. Then, a sharp stop, a 3-year blank. No explanation other than a vague, personal leave. Rachel leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her knee. The Caleb she'd met at the cafe, quiet, steady, warm, hadn't looked like a man who couldn't hold a job. He had looked like someone who had chosen stillness over chaos. She stood, crossed the room, and pulled up the digital application on the company portal. Attached to the application was a small note in the additional comments section. It simply read, "Looking to re-enter the tech world at my own pace. I'm not looking for pity, just purpose." Rachel's throat tightened. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, then began typing quickly, searching through internal records, LinkedIn, public data. And there it was. An article from 4 years ago, buried deep in the local news archives. Tech exec loses family in tragic freeway crash, leaves company weeks later. She didn't need to read the full piece. The photo told enough. Caleb, younger but recognizable, standing at a memorial site with a single white rose in his hand. Rachel leaned back, her breath shallow. She was not someone easily shaken, but something about the silence of his resume, the dignity in it, moved her. She looked back at the printed page. It felt like holding the tip of an iceberg. And someone in HR, had looked at that blank space and seen a flaw. She saw a fight. Rachel picked up her pen and crossed out the red line. Then, next to his name, she wrote in bold black ink, "Priority Review, Direct Interview with CEO." When her assistant returned with coffee, Rachel didn't look up. "Emily," she said evenly, "I want you to pull the full HR notes on this one, Caleb Morgan, and set up a one-on-one meeting, no panel, just him and me." Emily blinked. He's one of the rejected ones?" "Not anymore," Rachel said without looking up. 2 hours later, back in her office, Rachel closed the door and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. The sun was just beginning to break through the morning haze. People down on the street looked like toy figures rushing toward unknown goals. She thought of Caleb's words again, soft and simple. "If it were me, you'd do the same." But would she? Had she? How many people had she overlooked because they didn't fit neatly in the boxes? She remembered the way he had stepped back after paying, giving her space. The way he had dabbed the coffee from her blouse with quiet care, never making it awkward. The way he walked away as if expecting nothing, not even a thank you. And now here he was again. Not in the building by accident, but on a list she had never looked at until today. A man who had once led teams of 50 engineers, who had lost everything, and instead of collapsing, chose to rebuild with the tools he had left. Dignity, silence, and a job that let him breathe. Rachel looked back at her planner and circled the next Thursday afternoon in red. Below it she wrote, "Interview, Caleb Morgan. Read him, not the resume." The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Rachel Donovan's corner office, casting a golden hue on the glass table where 2 mugs of coffee sat, one untouched, one cooling. Caleb Morgan stood by the door, unsure of where to place his hands. He looked slightly out of place in the sleek, modern room, his security uniform clean but simple, his posture polite but guarded. Rachel gestured to the seat across from her. "Please have a seat." He obeyed quietly, but his eyes searched hers, calm and alert, like a man used to uncertainty. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," Rachel began, clasping her hands lightly on the table. Caleb offered a small smile. "You mean, besides the obvious, coffee incident?" She laughed just once and nodded. "Among other things." She reached for a folder on her desk and opened it slowly. Caleb Morgan, former senior systems engineer, 8 years at Halberd Technologies, multiple commendations. Then, 3 years with no entries, and now, a part-time building security role. "You didn't include any of that in your cover letter." He didn't flinch. "I didn't think it would matter. Most people stop reading after the gap." Rachel tilted her head. "And if they hadn't? If someone had read to the end?" He hesitated, then shrugged lightly. "They'd see someone rebuilding, on his own terms." She studied him for a long moment. "You're overqualified for any of the roles we posted. You know that, yes?" he said simply. "So why apply for something entry-level? Why not wait for the executive doors to open again?" His voice was quiet but unwavering. "Because I didn't want pity. I wanted purpose, a fresh start that I earned, not one handed to me out of guilt or curiosity." Rachel nodded slowly. There was something about the stillness in him, unmoving, steady. It wasn't pride, it wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. She looked down at the folder, then back at him. "Do you know what surprised me the most?" she asked. He shook his head. "That morning, when you paid for my coffee, you didn't linger, you didn't ask for anything, you didn't even let me thank you." He smiled just a little. "It didn't feel like something I needed thanks for. But it was," she said softly, "not just the coffee, but how you did it. You saw me, just a person, in a moment of need, not a CO, not a stranger to impress." Caleb said nothing, but his expression softened. Rachel reached into her drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table. "This isn't because of the coffee," she said, "and it's not out of obligation." He picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a formal offer letter. Not for a junior role, but for lead systems consultant on the new digital infrastructure project, one of the company's most ambitious undertakings in years. "I read your file," Rachel continued, her voice low, "but more importantly, I listened, and I saw what most people didn't." Caleb looked at her, eyes steady, but there was something fragile in them now, like the weight of being seen after a long time in shadow. "I'm not doing this because I owe you," she said. "I'm doing this because I need someone like you." A long silence passed. Finally, Caleb nodded once, then placed the envelope back on the table. "I'll accept," he said, "but on one condition." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" He smiled gently. "You let me pay for the next coffee." She laughed. "Deal." The elevator dinged softly as Caleb stepped onto the 22nd floor of Donovan Tower, the Executive and Strategy Division. The floor looked nothing like the lobby where he had stood months ago as a part-time security guard. Here, the lighting was warmer, the air subtly scented with cedar and lemon, and the walls were lined with sleek digital displays showing real-time data feeds and project dashboards. His ID badge now read Technical Strategy Consultant. He touched it absently, still not entirely used to the title. From the moment he stepped into the open office space, he felt the stares. Some were curious, others cautious, a few clearly skeptical. He heard it by the coffee station later that morning. 2 junior analysts whispering just loud enough. "Is that the guy? The security guard? Heard the CEO hired him personally." "Yeah," the other murmured. "Went from opening doors to running projects." Must have made a hell of a cup of coffee. Caleb didn't flinch. He'd been through worse, but it still stung. His first meetings were quiet. He was respectful, observant, saying little unless asked. But in the silence, he was learning about the systems, the gaps, the inefficiencies no one had addressed, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't see them like he did. That evening, as he packed up to leave, an email appeared in his inbox. Subject, "Just in case." From Rachel Donovan. Attached was a private link to the company's internal architecture blueprint and a confidential access pass to the latest infrastructure revision logs. No note, no comment, just what he needed. Caleb smiled quietly. Each day after, he came in early, left late. He asked questions, sometimes to no one in particular. He reviewed lines of code and system maps with the precision of someone who had built them from the inside out. Slowly, one by one, the team began to listen. And Rachel? She didn't hover. She never sat in his meetings or micromanaged his work. But every so often, he'd find small gestures. An extra whiteboard installed beside his desk. A new data model license added to his account. She was watching, quietly, the way he had once watched her, from behind a building's entrance, holding doors open while holding back his own past. The turning point came during the third week. It was a Monday morning review session. The room was packed. Strategists, project leads, IT heads. Caleb stood at the screen, dressed in a navy blazer over a simple shirt, no tie. He cleared his throat once. "I reviewed our current digital infrastructure," he said, pulling up a schematic, "and I found 3 redundancies across data sync channels that are costing us an estimated $420.00 annually." A few heads lifted. He clicked again. "With a layered consolidation strategy and smart caching," he pointed to the model, "we could reduce that by 85% within 6 months. Silence followed, then murmurs, then questions. Real ones. Technical, sharp, pressing. Caleb answered each clearly, confidently, like a man who hadn't just worn a badge, but had worn the weight of real responsibility. When the session ended, the room was still processing. Rachel, who had sat quietly at the back the entire time, stood. She walked forward, slowly, her heels soft against the carpet. Then, with a calm smile, she looked around and said simply, "I read his file. I read between the lines. And today, he just read the room." She turned to Caleb, her eyes warm with something more than approval. "I chose right." Applause started, not thunderous, but genuine. Caleb didn't smile, not right away. He only nodded and quietly packed up his notes. But inside, something shifted. The floor didn't feel so high up anymore, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was borrowing space. He was building something. Of his own. The clock on the wall ticked past 9:45 p.m. Most of Donovan Tower had gone dark, the city lights outside casting long reflections against the high-rising windows. But on the 22nd floor, 2 lights still burned, one in Rachel's office and the other at the far corner where Caleb worked, his screen aglow with cascading lines of code. Rachel had been staring at the same financial report for 20 minutes, her temples throbbing. Her blazer hung over the back of her chair, heels kicked off beneath her desk. Her hair, usually immaculate, was falling loose from its twist. It had been a brutal day, an unexpected budget cut in a subsidiary, a tense call with investors, and 3 back-to-back meetings that left no room to breathe. She barely noticed Caleb leave his seat until she heard the quiet knock on her glass door. Looking up, she saw no one. But on the edge of her desk sat a white ceramic mug, steam curling gently from the surface. Chamomile, her favorite. Next to it, a small folded note, written in firm, unhurried handwriting. "You look tired. The world can wait." She stared at it for a long moment, something tightening in her chest. No one had said anything like that to her in years. Everyone assumed she could handle anything, because she always had, because she never showed cracks. Because when you are the boss, kindness is often traded for expectation. Rachel leaned back in her chair, hands cradling the warm mug. She looked toward the far end of the floor, but Caleb's light was off now. He had left without a word. She should have expected that. The next morning brought a storm, Not of weather, but of corporate chaos. A leaked internal memo had sparked confusion among regional teams. The media caught wind. There was speculation, panic, and in the emergency meeting that followed, Rachel found herself in the center of a firing squad. "How could this happen on your watch? We should have had better controls. Is leadership even aligned?" The questions came fast, pointed, veiled in professional tone, but laced with accusation. Rachel sat at the head of the table, spine straight, jaw tight, absorbing each word without flinching, but her knuckles whitened around the pen in her hand. Then Caleb spoke. He hadn't planned to, but something about the way Rachel's eyes had flickered, just once, barely visible, made him move. "With respect," he said, his voice calm but clear, "if we are going to question leadership, let's be accurate." The room turned. Rachel wasn't the leak. She wasn't the bottleneck. And she sure as hell wasn't the one who failed to flag the outdated communications protocol. That was my team, and I own that. Silence. Caleb continued. "But while you're pointing fingers, she's been in this office at midnight cleaning up the mess, so unless anyone here has logged more hours this week than she has, I suggest we direct our attention to fixing, not blaming." A beat. Then Rachel spoke, her voice steady, but softer than usual. "Thank you, Caleb." The meeting continued, less hostile now, more focused. When it ended, Rachel lingered behind, stacking papers in silence. Caleb stood by the door, waiting. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. Less guarded, warmer. "Why did you do that?" she asked, quietly. "Because you were alone," he said simply. "And I know what that feels like." She crossed her arms, not in defense, but in something closer to vulnerability. "You really believe that's enough? Just showing up?" Caleb nodded. "It's where everything starts." For the first time, Rachel didn't have a sharp reply. She just looked at him, really looked, and realized, somehow, in this whirlwind of corporate warfare, he had found a way to reach her, not through power, not through strategy, but through stillness, through seeing. Later that night, she found herself rereading the note he left. "You look tired. The world can wait." And for the first time, maybe it could. The grand ballroom of Donovan Corp's 10-year anniversary gala glowed under crystal chandeliers. The room was filled with executives, investors, media, and smiling colleagues. Toasts were made to a decade of innovation and expansion. A string quartet performed softly near the raised dais. The atmosphere was polished, celebratory. But Rachel Donovan felt a strange blend of pride and exhaustion. She had organized every detail, yet this night felt unreal. She wore a floor-length midnight blue gown. The deep cut at her back revealed just a touch of skin, and the fabric shimmered when she moved under the warm lights. Her blonde hair cascaded in loose waves, and her makeup was poised, confident, elegant, but she carried the weight of the evening on her shoulders. Caleb Morgan stood by the service doors, watching. He was in a classic tuxedo, no frilly accessory, no flashy cufflinks, just clean, understated, genuine. He had arrived early to help Rachel with gala details, ensuring stage lighting was soft, checking microphones, and quietly regrouping staff. He had slipped away to change into formal wear, but his mind was still on her. Earlier in the evening, he noticed her shiver as she greeted guests near the north window, drafts from the open balcony. With discreet timing, he dropped a soft, navy cashmere wrap over her shoulders before she saw him. His fingers brushed hers briefly as he arranged the folds. She felt it, even then. Now, as the final presentation concluded and the quartet ended on a lingering chord, the assembled crowd moved toward the dining area. Glasses clinked, laughter spread. Rachel smiled, thanked people, accepted compliments. But her thoughts were elsewhere. A hush fell, the fireworks were scheduled. Opening the southwest terrace doors, Rachel stepped out, adjusting the wrap around her slender shoulders and pausing as the warm air hit. Caleb followed a few steps behind. The sky exploded with color, first red, then electric blue, a cascade of gold. Each burst lit their faces, vibrant, bright. the fireworks reflected in her eyes. Caleb watched her watch them. She turned slightly and a smile flickered. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It is," he agreed. They stood side by side, silent. She lifted a brow almost imperceptibly. He took in a slow breath. "You're cold." She looked at him. He held out his free hand. She placed both of hers in it. They watched the next bursts together. The explosions faded into a soft afterglow. Rachel's gaze shifted back to him. "Why are you always noticing the little things?" she asked, voice caught between wonder and vulnerability. He considered. The fireworks ended. The night air was gentle. He said quietly, "Because I know what it's like when no one notices." Her heart skipped. That phrase landed like a confession. She glanced down at their joined hands. His palm was warm, steady. His thumb brushed across her fingers. She looked back at the sky, then back at him. "Thank you," she whispered. He squeezed gently. "Always." They stayed like that, holding hands, not touching lips yet, but connected. Two people whose worlds had slowly merged beyond roles and resumes. Behind them, applause rose in the ballroom, welcoming the guests back inside. They lingered a few more moments, because neither wanted to rush back to small talk. Now came the true crescendo, not of fireworks, but of truth. "Rachel?" Caleb began, his voice low. She looked up at his profile lit by starlight. "I can't promise it will always be perfect," he said, "but I promise I'll keep noticing." She leaned in. The wrap fell, revealing more of her shoulder, but she shivered less than before. Their eyes met. No words needed. Then he stepped closer, gently tilted her chin up. The office was quieter than usual. It was past 7 p.m. and most of the floor was dark except for a corner cubicle where soft typing could still be heard. Caleb passed by on his way to grab a folder he had forgotten, but something in the stillness made him stop. Inside the cubicle sat Mia, one of the youngest members of the analytics team. Her face was pale, eyes red from what she thought were unnoticed tears. Caleb leaned gently against the edge of the cubicle and spoke softly. "You okay?" She startled, quickly wiping her cheeks. Yes, it's nothing." Caleb didn't press. He sat on the chair across from her and simply waited. After a few moments, she said quietly, "I messed up a report. Bad. It's going to affect next week's client presentation. I don't know if I belong here." Caleb nodded slowly. "You think the rest of us never mess up?" She blinked, surprised. "But you're calm. You always seem to have it together." "I used to be an engineer," he said. "Once shipped a product update that crashed an entire platform for 3 days. I thought I'd never get another chance." "What happened?" He smiled slightly. "Someone sat down across from me and said, 'You're allowed to fail. You're not allowed to give up.' So I didn't." Mia exhaled. Some of the tension in her shoulders eased. "Redo the report," he added. "If you want, I'll check it with you. You're not alone in this." From across the glass panel, Rachel had been walking down the corridor and paused. She saw the scene, Caleb's patient presence, the way Mia's body shifted from defeat to steadiness. It wasn't grand, but it was leadership. Quiet, human, real. Later, as they walked out of the building together, Rachel finally said, "You make me rethink how I lead." He looked at her. She continued, "All this time I thought leadership was about being ahead of everyone. But maybe it's more about walking alongside." Caleb smiled, hands in his coat pockets. "Leadership doesn't start with power, it starts with presence." They reached the curb. Her car was still in the shop, and he offered her a ride home again. She agreed. Inside the car, the city lights flickered past. Rachel leaned her head back against the seat, letting out a quiet sigh. "You're right," she said. "You don't have to say much to change something for someone." He glanced at her. "Neither do you." She turned to him, lips curving. "You always notice more than people think you do." "I used to miss things," he said, voice soft. "Now I try not to." The car grew quiet again. a gentle quiet. Soft instrumental music played low from the speakers. As the traffic slowed, Rachel's eyes began to close. The fatigue of the week, the emotional weight of everything, finally settled. She didn't mean to fall asleep, but within minutes her breathing evened, head tilting slightly to one side, hair brushing her cheek. Caleb noticed. At the next red light, he turned slightly toward her. A few strands of her blonde hair had caught at the corner of her lips. Carefully, without a sound, he lifted a hand, paused, just inches away. He hesitated. Something in him stirred. Not the rush of infatuation, but something older, warmer, a sense of recognition, of having found something he thought he had lost for good. As his fingers gently brushed the hair away from her face, Rachel stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. For a second, neither of them moved. Her gaze met his. His hand still hovered near her cheek. He began, pulling back quickly. Sorry, your hair. Her face flushed, but her eyes didn't leave his. It's okay. They didn't say anything more, but the air between them shifted. Something unspoken, undeniable, began to take root. When they reached her building, he stepped out and opened her door, as always. She stepped out slowly, turning back to him with a look softer than usual. Thank you, she said. For tonight, for earlier, for seeing people. His answer was a small, understanding nod. As she walked up the stairs, she glanced back once. He was still standing there, hands in his coat pockets, watching her. Not with possession, but quiet regard. Inside her apartment, Rachel leaned against the door for a moment, pressed a hand to her chest. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the beginning of something else. Something no MBA program, no leadership seminar, no board meeting had ever taught her. She smiled, because some lessons, the ones that matter most, can only be learned from someone who's lived them. The auditorium was filled with soft applause as Rachel stepped onto the stage. A large screen behind her displayed the logo of Donovan Corp., along with the title of the program she had championed over the past year, The Second Door, Hiring Without Bias. It had become more than a pilot idea. It had become a national conversation. Rachel wore a navy blue pantsuit, simple but strong. Her hair was pinned back, her voice calm as she addressed the crowd. I stand here not just as a CEO, but as someone who once got a second look, who realized that sometimes the most valuable resumes are the ones we almost miss. This initiative isn't about charity. It's about recognizing value in quiet places, in quiet people. Applause erupted again, cameras flashing. But while her name was printed in bold on the certificate she received, while her photo would be featured in industry publications the following week, Rachel's eyes searched the back of the room. Past the lights, past the applause, Caleb stood near the exit, not on stage, not in the spotlight, just as he preferred. He caught her gaze. She gave a small nod. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the press moved on, Rachel slipped out the side door and found him waiting near the lobby's wide glass windows. You stood back, she said. I always do, he replied with a soft smile. She stepped closer. You're the reason I stood up there tonight. He shook his head slightly. You were always going to stand up there? Rachel looked down for a moment, then gently took his hand. I don't love you because you were kind to me when my card got declined, she said. I love you because you're kind when no one's watching. His fingers curled around hers instinctively. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside, the city buzzed like it always did, but for them the night held a stillness they both understood. Later, they found themselves back at the same coffee shop where it had all begun. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalk was still wet, reflecting the golden glow from the windows inside. They ordered 2 coffees, hers with oat milk, his black. The barista smiled, recognizing them vaguely from that article about Donovan's CEO. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out her card, held it up with a smirk. What if it gets declined again? Caleb leaned slightly forward, his voice low. Then I'll just scan mine again, he said, eyes twinkling. Some habits are hard to break. She handed over her card. The machine beeped, approved. They both laughed. But then she grew quiet, looked down at her coffee, then back up at him. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she asked. "What if that day you hadn't been in line behind me? What if you had looked away?" Caleb leaned back, thoughtful. "I think we still would have met, just somewhere else. Kindness doesn't need timing. It just needs two people willing to see each other." She nodded. Outside, a gentle breeze passed. Inside, the warmth of the coffee, the hum of soft music, the weight of a year full of change and choice. Rachel reached across the table and rested her hand over his. "This," she said, voice almost a whisper, "was never just about a coffee." "No," Caleb said, his thumb brushing against hers. "It was about someone seeing someone and choosing to stay." The machine behind the counter dinged again. Another order ready. But for Rachel and Caleb, their beginning had already been brewed and served, quietly, kindly, and just the way they needed. And the future? Well, it tasted a lot like coffee and courage. If this story touched your heart the way Caleb's quiet kindness touched Rachel's life, we invite you to stay for more. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we believe that even the smallest acts, like paying for a stranger's coffee, can change the course of a life, and sometimes they lead to something even greater, a connection, a second chance, or a love that grows in silence before it speaks. If you believe in love that grows quietly, in second chances, and in the power of everyday goodness, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and hit the bell icon. New stories every week, crafted to warm your heart and remind you, the softest moments often leave the deepest mark. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness is never wasted.